let me talk first about rent and the alternatives for rent. And I'll give you two case examples. A couple years ago, we completed a ground lease for a client down in Mountain View. This is the building I was telling you about earlier. It's beautifully located. It's a one-story building, about just under 10,000 square feet, and very profitable. And there's an existing tenant in the ground floor space whose lease runs for another 5 years. So when we negotiated with the ground tenant here, the ground lessee, they were very interested in this piece of property, mainly because the city of Mountain View is changing and expanding their entitlements for properties, in Mountain View, so that the floor area ratio, the FAR, for this building is increasing or may increase 2 to 3 times in the next few years. This is what made this piece of property very desirable to the ground lessee, because they may, in 3, 4, 5 years, be able to add 1 or 2 stories onto the existing one-story, 10,000 square foot building. And it made for an interesting negotiation. The client here was willing to take on some development risk. So we structured for the client percentage rent. That is, the client shares in the rent, profit, and income that the ground lessee realizes from its ground tenants. And what we negotiated was that the ground lessee will get only 50% of the rent that's generated by the ground floor tenant. This is because the ground floor already exists. The ground lessee is coming into the ground lease and assuming the ground floor space lease. And so our clients said, we don't want to give the ground lessee more than 50% of the rent, the profit on the ground floor, because it's already there. Ground lessee was said fine, because if they build a second or third floor or make further additions to this little building, we negotiated that the ground lessee will get 80% of the rents that they realize from the space tenants on the second and third floors, and our client only gets 20%. But the corollary to that is that the ground lessee, at its sole cost and expense, will add the second and or third floors to the building, which at the end of 34 years, when the fee returns to our client, has added a great deal of value to the piece of property. So that's how we structured the rent in this transaction. Even in percentage rent deals, such as the one I've just talked about, the ground lessor is always paid a minimum base rent below the 50% in this case, below the 20% in this case, regardless of the ground lessee's failure to lease up the property or vacancies, casualties, failure to develop, and COVID-19. And the last point on this slide is that ground lease rents, to my experience, are never subject to force majeure provisions like you'd find in a space lease, okay? The reason for this is that the ground lessee tenant is effectively the owner of the real property for the 34 years that they're in occupancy. And so custom and practice is that the ground lessees always agree to pay the minimum ground lease rent to the ground lessor, regardless of whether they're making money on the property or not. Oh, let's see. Let me go. I jumped ahead. That was the percentage rent basis. The lease that we've just completed in Palo Alto, our clients, the ground lessors, were a little older and more risk averse to sharing in the profits of the development. So there we structured a very fair deal. The example I've got here is that Our clients are paid $50,000 a month for the first 5 years of the ground lease. This is even during the period that the ground lessee is out there not making a penny on the property, but finishing their entitlements and designing and constructing the new improvements on the site. The way this lease works, and this is fairly common if you have a fixed rent ground lease, is that every 5 years, the ground lease rent to our client, the ground lessor, will go up on a formula basis. It can be 15% of the previous 5 years rent. It can be the greater of 15% or the CPI increase over the 5-year period, subject to caps, etc. We had a fairly aggressive ground lessee in this deal, so we negotiated just a straight 15% increase every 5 years. It's still very good income to our clients, and everybody was pleased.